World War I on RTE. Ireland's Experience with Miles Duncan. Episode 2. The Front.
Let's wind the clock back to the beginning, to August 1914. The 2nd Royal Dublin Fusiliers have just arrived at the outskirts of a small village in the north of France. The landscape is dotted with red poppies, a flower which will commemorate many of their lives in decades to come. Louise Denvir went to France this summer to trace the steps of this battalion.
First thing we have to get into our head is where we are and why we're here.
On the 23rd of August 1914, the 2nd Royal Dublin Fusiliers travelled from Southampton on the HMS Caledonia to northern France.
They were taken by train through the night from Boulogne to this station here.
Tom Burke is a military historian from Dublin.
We're at this little village, this train station called Le Cateau. Because literally this is where it started for the Dublin Fusiliers.
Le Cateau is a coal mining village, but after 1914, it was more well known for the devastation caused by the bloodshed on the farms surrounding it.
If we link Le Cateau with places like Rathfarnham, Skerries, Dorset Street, Sheriff Street, it doesn't sort of rhyme. But that's the reality of it. Because the fellows who landed here were from Sheriff Street, were from Skerries, were from Raheny, from Malahide, country villages, Gloucester Street.
After the train journey, the troops faced a long walk ahead, a trip that wasn't helped by their ill-fitting footwear.
The boot sizes were completely off the wall, which is an indication, is kind of a reflection of how well the British were prepared for this war.
The call to France came suddenly for the battalion, and there was simply no time to break in their boots before the journey to Le Cateau.
Those boot sizes that these fellas had were all different sizes, different makes. Their feet were red.
The men walked for hours on end, with the pain of brand new hard leather shoes.
If we were a battalion of Dublin Fusiliers, what we would have to do now is regroup and head northwards to face the German army coming at them. During the night of the 23rd, 24th of August, they marched from the train station through the little villages, and as they walked, dawn came.
The group eventually stopped at Farm Fontaine-aux-Tetres.
It's a beautiful field in the French countryside. It's rolling hills. It's peaceful now.
And it was here where they would have their last and only meal of the day.
They got a breakfast here. The sun came up. But they could hear in the distance German artillery. It's a beautiful old French classic Victorian farm. It has that characteristic red brick. It's called Fontaine-aux-Tetres. They had a breakfast here very early. It was the last bit of grub they had because from then on in, the retreat began. There was a Corporal O'Donnell, 2nd Dublins, who was well recorded in Chris Hutton's book. I'll just read it out to you. He says, at about 11 p.m, there was a sudden burst of rifle fire from men in the orchard. And he says, the first shots fired by the Dublins in the war. It lasted about 2 minutes. We in the farmyard, and he quotes Fontaine-aux-Tetres, could hear the footbeat of the enemy's cavalry for miles racing back along the road. So what happened was the Uhlans had discovered that the Dubs were here. One of the things about the German infantry, the first thing they sent out was the cavalry. The Germans used horses, and they were called Uhlans. Dublin Fusiliers used a bicycle. And they went back to tell their commanding officers the Brits have arrived, i.e. the Dubs. The next day, after that discovery had been made, German artillery knew exactly where the battalion was, and they literally pulverised the place. And you can see the rolling hills, the landscape of it. It was perfect for advancing infantry. It must have been like a tidal wave of men. And as soon as the Dublin Fusiliers saw them, they just had to leave. They literally picked up the tools and walked back out the road they came from. It all happened within 24 hours.
Podcast Ireland's Experience. rte.ie/World War I.